What's up, everybody? I am Brett L. Pape. That's Coach Bruce, and this is the Coach Approach. What's up, everybody? Coach, good to see you again. Crazy first week. We'll get into all that. I can see that familiar face of the Ontario Hotel behind you. Hope your traveling's going well, and looking forward to breaking down what we just saw.
Travel went really well. Met with some customers today. Had a great productive day. It's been a good week and looking ready to get back out again tomorrow. But can't wait to talk some football with you tonight, man. Lots to
Well,
cover.
yes, lots to cover, and I hope we're not too long-winded because we did have a lot of stuff on the show sheet. So let's get right into it. It's got to start kind of somberly, don't you think, Coach, with what happened Monday night? You know, Aaron Rodgers, torn Achilles, out for the year. Happens on the fourth play of the game. Didn't look like a big hit, but we both kind of suspected that's what we saw, the way the kind of the ankle roll. And if you really watch the film close, you kind of saw that whole calf kind of gyrate or whatever you want to call it. But so unfortunate because, you know, the whole hopes of the city, the whole hopes of the organization, in a lot of ways, the hopes of the NFL was that he was going to do exactly what they brought him in to do. And that was lead them to at least a Super Bowl run. And for it to be over so quickly. And what I like the most about what I saw from Aaron Rodgers since he's made the move is it kind of seemed like his personality changed a bit. He was very engaging with the fans. He was very engaging with his teammates, even the rookies. You know, you've heard all the talk of what happened in Green Bay, how he treated rookie receivers and so forth. Didn't see any of that on Hard Knocks. You saw someone that looked to be having fun. So it was heartbreaking. And just to know that he's gone, you know, people talk, you know, we've seen some speculation of this is it. He also talked prior to any injury that he wanted to play for the Jets for at least a couple years. In fact, he said that in an early press conference. But whether or not he comes back, he's definitely not going to be back this year, and that's got to be pretty tough.
No, look, hey, it's a devastating loss. I mean, the New York Jets have got to feel just so cursed at this point, right? You finally get a guy in after going through what was the Zach Wilson debacle last year, and you go out and you get an Aaron Rodgers in who's been a Super Bowl champion. He's one of the most efficient quarterbacks in the history of the game. He has an excellent turnover ratio. So, you know, it's tough. I mean, all the expectations of that defense is built to win now. Tough. You hate to see it. 4 snaps in, you know, it's 9-11, comes running out with the flag. Kay Adams put a post on social media. By the way, missed her on Good Morning Football. Not the same without her, but she's in a suite and she fans the screen and is showing the crowd in New York. And she says she's never been in a stadium that was that loud. And then literally 4 snaps into the season, he's done. He just felt the energy of that stadium go out. But unbelievable, man. It's a huge loss for them. Zach Wilson did enough to keep him relevant through a touchdown pass on what might be the greatest catch of the season with Garrett Wilson. So it's going to be interesting to see how that team rebounds. Robert Saleh is saying all the right things and I think doing all the right things. I think that team's going to rally around Robert Saleh's leadership, but we'll see what happens. But devastating loss for New York Jets, their fan base, and of course all the players in that locker room.
And yet they still find a way to come back and win, which was, you know, we talked about it before. And one of the things that I would have to say is that I don't think there were too many fans outside of Buffalo that wasn't rooting for the Jets after Aaron Rodgers went down. And for them to win it the way they did in overtime on an incredible punt return by the rookie, that was Xavier Gibson, the guy that was the darling on Hard Knocks. In fact, he was shown in the last week when he found out that he made the team. And one of the things that Robert Saleh said to him was that we know you're going to do some great things for us this year. And he did it right away. It was pretty neat to see the way that's a pretty resilient bunch. But we can talk about that situation forever. In fact, we will talk about the game more and break it down a little bit later. Also, I don't know if it was him sitting in the stands and seeing the Kansas City Chiefs lose last week, but whatever the reason, Chris Jones decided that he's going to come back. He signs a incentive-laced contract where he can earn an additional $6 million. Now, granted, if you saw the details of what has to happen, There's a lot that's got to happen, and he's already lost one game. But for whatever the reason, he's back, and I'm sure Chiefs fans and Chief personnel are pretty happy that he is.
Yeah, I've got to believe, when he's sitting up in the stands watching that game, I think the hardest thing for an athlete is to not be out there with your teammates, in the trenches and making an impact and doing everything you can to help your team win. And seeing them lose week one, I'm sure probably didn't sit well with them. And it certainly didn't sit well with the fan base and with the guys in that locker room and the coaching staff. So it was nice to see them get that deal done. This was a guy that was talking about, hey, he can afford to sit out. If this goes through, week 8, he's okay with it. So it's nice to see that the calmer heads prevailed and they got him locked up and they got him in there this year. And he's such a huge piece of that defense up, especially up front, man. Both not just in the passing game as a rush, but also as against the run game and what he does there too. So good to see that deal get done.
Definitely good if you're sitting on the other side of the field for, I should say, definitely not good if you're on the other side of the field for an opposing quarterback. But let's move on. Let's move on to injuries. And along with Aaron Rodgers with his Achilles, this one is obviously a heartbreaker too for a kid that just hasn't been able to catch a break since he got in the NFL. And that's J.K. Dobbins, tears his Achilles, out for the year. He looked really fresh. He had a lot of bounce to him. If you saw his 4-yard touchdown run and the way he kind of jumped into the end zone, the guy was running with some steam. And it's sad because it seems to be every year he has some issue, and which is one of the reasons why a lot of people were critical of him this summer when he was doing a sit-in, because they're like, what are you asking for more money or having your contract redone when you can't seem to stay on the field? And his premise was, well, I'm never going to get paid if that's what everyone feels. So that's why he was doing it. Unfortunately, he came back, said, you know what, let's go ahead and play for my next contract, and he gets hurt right out of the gate.
Yeah, tough deal. I mean, and you said it perfectly. I mean, this is the guy that's averaging 5 yards a carry over his career. He's explosive. I saw the 4-yard run that you're referring to, and that's what you want from a featured back. And they went from a Greg Roman offense into a Todd Monken offense, which is more of a spread offense, and they're going to have to rely on now Gus Edwards, right, who's had some injury history of his own. Justice Hill that found the end zone. You got Melvin Gordon, who called it from the practice squad. So they've got 3 guys that have certainly got some experience, but it's always difficult when you see a guy like J.K. Dobbins go through the knee issues that he went through, and now to have the Achilles deal happen is tough. But that team's built. Like, they brought in Odell Beckham. They've got Rashad Bateman coming off the foot injury last year. I think is a great option there. And then you got Zay. What can't I think of his last name right now? Zay Flowers out of Boston College, who we were high on going into the draft, and we got to see him in week 1. Put that into play in the very first game of his professional career. So, I think we're going to see that a little bit more. I personally am not touching that backfield. Obviously, I've already drafted Gus Edwards. He's on a roster. I didn't spend any fab on Justice Hill. I wasn't willing to overpay for him based on the history of his career. Obviously, got in the end zone a couple times last week, but I think this is going to be a running back by committee. I think you're going to see Gus Edwards get some of the early down work. Justice Hill get involved in the passing game. Melvin Gordon's a guy that can use to spell either one of those two, but I see more of a 50-50 split. And we're still going to look to see them, I think, spread the ball a little bit more in the passing game, especially when Mark Andrews gets back, which hopefully will be this week. But tough loss, and you feel for J.K.
Yeah,
Dobbins
definitely
for sure.
Tough loss. And kind of like what you said, I'm going to reiterate it a little bit. But yes, I'm not really actively trying to go out and trade for a Gus Edwards or a Justice Hill, and I'm also not going to overpay for them with fab money. But if they're on the bottom of my bench because you got 33-man rosters and Superflex, you're happy because you know that you're going to probably have to, A, put them in a running back spot, or B, just use them at a flex. So there's certainly a lot more value of those guys this week than there was last week. Moving on to the next injury, to a guy that a lot of people talked about coming in the season after a successful season last year, coming out of UCLA, and that's Greg Dulcich. Hamstring injury. He's expected to be out for the next 2 to 4 weeks. Unfortunately, he kind of has a little history with this. Had a hamstring injury last year that caused him 7 games. So with him being out, what do you like? I will say that we were both kind of surprised that we saw more from Adam Troutman in game 1. But regardless, big loss for the Denver Broncos.
Yeah, it is a big loss. And I think people were talking about there's a utilization chart that Dwayne McFarland does over at myfantasylife.com, which is fantastic. And he broke down a lot of the preseason stuff. And you were seeing Adam Troutman getting used more with the ones, getting used more as the inline guy, and getting reps. So there were concerns about what Greg Dulcich's role was going to be, but the reality is he's the pass catching tight end in that offense. Now, Adam Troutman spent 3 years with New Orleans, 81 targets, 60 grabs, over 600 yards and 4 touchdowns during his 3 seasons there. He's a serviceable guy. And even in this game, 5 targets, 5 grabs, did only get 34 yards, didn't find the end zone, but he's a serviceable guy. But you're losing something, especially in terms of verticality and what Greg Dulcich can do after the catch and attacking the football at the high point. So those are things you're not going to get with Adam Troutman that you would get with Greg Dulcich. But he's serviceable, but after that, man, the roster gets really thin at the tight end position. So it's not a good thing for Denver Broncos fans by losing a guy like Greg Dulcich, who I was actually higher on, I think, than some coming into this season.
Yeah, and they didn't look that great offensively. You read all the tweets in the first half. Russell Wilson's looking like the old Russell Wilson. This is fun to watch. Thank God he's not what we saw last year. Peyton is actually a savior. And then the second half, you kind of saw all that kind of come back. And I'm beginning to believe they need Jerry Jeudy back. They need somebody else on the outside that can kind of help with the vertical game and just get some separation, because they were certainly lacking separation last week. One guy that wasn't lacking much last week was Aaron Jones. I believe he was RB1 or RB2 in most scoring formats. Unfortunately, on his long touchdown reception from Jordan Love, kind of pulled up late as he's crossing the end zone with a hamstring injury. Did not practice today. I will say after the game and early on in the week, Monday, he had talked like he doesn't think it's like that big of a deal. So he may or may not play. If he doesn't play, that's going to leave you with A.J. Dillon. And A.J. Dillon unfortunately looked like a lot what he looked like last year. And that's kind of very inefficient with his ability or with the opportunities that he's getting. He had 13 carries for 19 yards. And he had 2 carries inside the 3-yard line, wasn't able to get it in. They had to bring Aaron Jones back in to do that. So if Jones is out, you're going to probably play A.J. Dillon, but I don't feel great about it.
Yeah, I don't either. A.J. Dillon, you face Atlanta, who gave up 154 yards on the ground last week against Carolina. And then you've got Emmanuel Wilson, who's the undrafted free agent out of Division II, Fort Valley State. So there's not a whole lot of depth there. A.J. Dillon certainly has been a guy that's been able to step in and be a key cog in that offense. But I agree with you. In week 1, he didn't look great. But, sometimes when you're the backup guy, there's 2 ways you can go, right? You're the guy that when you get your chance to get reps, your balls to the walls, you're doing everything you can to earn reps, and you're running angry. And sometimes you're the guy that you just kind of go with the flow of the game because you realize you're not going to be out there as long as you think you should be. And so A.J. Dillon has that flash of where he looks great, and then he has some times where he kind of looks a little bit lackadaisical. And so you hope now with him going into this week as the number 1 featured back, if Aaron Jones is out, now again, I think he's probably going to play. Did not practice today, but I think they're just being precautionary at this point. But if you do have to roll with A.J. Dillon, you're not facing a great defensive front in Atlanta, so they are susceptible to the run. So I think you could see A.J. Dillon be involved, but and then not having Christian Watson, if he's still not back, still had some hamstring issues. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Certainly something to look for through Saturday before Sunday's game.
Yes, most definitely, because if he's in, he showed his value right off the bat, and he's shown it the last 3 years. Let's move on. Another injury, and this one kind of hurts, is because a lot of people were high on him, and I know you were one of them, and that's Deontay Johnson, hamstring injury, likely out this week. Didn't see a lot from him last week, but let's be honest, we saw very little from the Pittsburgh offense. With him being out, what do you like facing Cleveland? We saw Cleveland, they looked pretty good defensively. They certainly shut down an offense that a lot of people were very high on in Cincinnati. But what do you see happening this week with Johnson being out at the receiver level?
Well, first off, you're right. I was very high in Deontay Johnson, and I was getting him in every draft that I could, especially the value he was going at, where you could get him in rounds 9 and 10 in drafts. And this is a guy that's been a wide receiver 1. So, but now, hey, look, George Pickens, you can't just be the vertical guy. You can't be the intermediate to deep guy. You got to be a guy that has run a little bit more of a complete route tree, and you've got to be a guy that's going to step up. He didn't look great last week, but the reality is I'm not going to measure those guys by going up against San Francisco. He's got one of the top 3 defenses in the league. And Kenny Pickett struggled last week. But Allen Robinson, has got a chance to step in. He played well last week in comparison to what we saw with him last year. And Calvin Austin III, who a lot of people were high on. He was a very athletic kid, he's a speed guy. He's going to get an opportunity to step up. And Pat Freiermuth, if he can be healthy, I think you see a little bit more of Jaylen Warren. We saw a little bit more of a 50-50 split between him and Najee Harris. It's Jaylen. To me, it's Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris are the Tony Pollard and Zeke Elliott right now, right? That's kind of feel like Najee Harris kind of looks like Zeke over the last couple of years. So his efficiency metrics aren't great, whereas Jaylen Warren looks more like Tony Pollard. He seems to be the guy that's I think is going to be the guy by midseason, maybe even the next few weeks.
All right, let's move on to the next one, Jakobi Meyers, and all that Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. We're gonna kind of break that down a little bit later when we talk about some of our risers and fallers. Let's talk about the next injury though. Jakobi Meyers in concussion protocol. Obviously, that is something that typically you don't find out what that means as far as his availability until the day of. But at this point, we're still uncertain what it's going to mean for this weekend. But I'll tell you, coming out week one, new offense, Jimmy G at quarterback, he goes out and collects 9 receptions for 81 yards and 2 touchdowns. In his 4 years with New England, he had 8 touchdowns. I can remember, I think his first 3 years in the NFL, he had no touchdowns. For him, come out right off the bat and kind of put that stigma away and kind of take off like he did. It was pretty neat to watch. And he's definitely someone, when healthy, if that's the type of action he's going to get, he becomes a must starter for you. So hopefully this is not going to be something that goes on for a while.
Yeah. Hey, look, I mean, I'm a Jakobi Meyers guy. He's another guy that, he struggled to get in the end zone early in his career, but the guy fits the profile. He's prototypical, the position he plays in that offense. You talked about his numbers last week, and now you're going to, it's Devontae Adams, Hunter Renfrow, DeAndre Carter, the former Charger is going to have to step in probably in that wide receiver role. And you got Trey Tucker out of the University of Cincinnati, who was a round 3 draft pick that could be stepping in there too. But I hope Jakobi Meyers is playing this week. I think concussion, unfortunately, right now, especially with Tua Tagovailoa and what happened last year, the NFL is very, very, particular about how teams are handling the concussion protocol and making sure that all signs are pointing in the right direction. But I certainly like to see Jakobi Meyers get an opportunity to play this week against the Bills.
Let's hope he does. Let's move on to the last injury we're going to discuss. And we're really not going to hit it on it very hard because we're going to talk about him in the Thursday night preview. And I think I also will hit on him a little bit in the risers and fallers. And that's Kenneth Gainwell. Kenneth Gainwell has already been ruled out. He is not going to play in the Thursday night game with rib injuries, but we won't spend much time on that and we'll talk more about it in the fantasy impact and what other guys we expect to kind of step in and fill the void. But let's jump into our week 1 recap. And in this recap, we don't have the time to go over 15 NFL games. I'm sure you don't want us to. So we just kind of hit on about 4 or 5. So let's start off right off the bat. And I'm sure you're going to like this one. And that's the Dallas Cowboys 40, New York Giants 0. My thoughts, and then I'm just going to let you go on. My thoughts tend to lead with the Giants. And this is a team where I had a great opportunity, and I'm hoping that we're going to be able to get him on at some point. But I'm a huge Dodgers fan, as you know, and one of the big kind of media guys, kind of podcast guys, kind of a huge Twitter follower or kind of a Twitter follow for Dodger fans is a guy named Blake Harris. And Blake is pretty cool because he always puts together a whole bunch of Dodger fan drafts for the NFL season. And one of the things that we discussed was the fact that in that league, I went very high on the New York Giants. I had stack of Daniel Jones. I went with the stack Saquon Barkley, and then I got Darren Waller. And I thought all the talk coming into the year with the Giants is that they were going to be much better on the offense. Year 2 under Brian DeBall. And to see them really struggle, I sure hope that is more of an indication of Dallas is just that damn good on the defensive side and not so much that the Giants are going to have a down year. Now go ahead and tell us about how great Dallas is coaching.
Somehow I knew you were going to say something like that, but look, what can you say? I mean, you're 3 phases of the game.
Right to.
Yeah, I mean, hey, 3 phases of the game. Let's say you want to start opening week. You start on the road against New York. A lot of people, they went 9-8 last year. Brian Dable had some success. And Daniel Jones which we expected him to do in a Brian Daboll offense. Played a lot better last year and was very, very fantasy relevant last year. But hey, look, Dan Quinn sticks around for another year. A lot of people thought he was going to go and get a head coaching position, deservedly so for him. But you put up a 40 burger and you shut out the other team. I mean, you just look at some of the numbers. The big three with the Giants. Daniel Jones was 15 of 28 with 104 yards, throws 2 picks. One of those was a pick 6. You got Saquon Barkley who only goes 12 for 51 yards. Darren Waller was held to 3 catches for 36 yards. A lot of people feel like me included. I think he's going to lead that team in targets and receptions and have a big season this year from a fantasy perspective. But Dallas, literally 4 guys with more than 4 pressures, 7 total sacks. Micah Parsons wreaked havoc all week long. That the D tackle position, the D end position. I can name all the guys, but they absolutely dominated the game. But then you take special teams. Giants went on a drive on that opening drive and went down the field, got themselves in field goal position. You block it, you return it for a touchdown. That sets the tone. Offensively, we did struggle a little bit. Dak was only 13 of 24 for 140 yards, but Tony Pollard, 14 for 70, got in the end zone twice, and CeeDee Lamb had 77 yards on 4 receptions. So I think in all 3 phases of the game, we saw enough from the offense in a game that didn't have to do a whole lot to show us where this offense, I think, can be. And now you face a Jets team next week that, doesn't have Aaron Rodgers, and it's your first home game of the season. So obviously very happy to start the Dallas Cowboys head of this season. And if you're a Giants fan, look, it's 1 week. There's 17 games in a season, 18 weeks long. I think the Giants are going to be fine, but that's a tough loss to take, in the first week, for sure.
Yes, and let's move on to another tough loss, and that's the loss the Seattle Seahawks face this week. I was very high on it. Not on it. I was very high on Seattle. In fact, I actually put Seattle as my Super Bowl champ. I switched it after had a few beers that night, so I decided the next morning maybe I won't go that direction. And it's probably a good choice that I made, because actually after watching a team that a lot of people thought they might tank to try and get a better draft pick in the upcoming season, and that's the Los Angeles Rams. But tank they did not do. They went up north and they beat Seattle 30-13. And I think what I was most surprised with, and I'm sure you're going to kind of reiterate that as well, is the fact that the Seattle offense didn't get anything going, other than an early touchdown pass to DK Metcalf from Geno Smith.
Yeah.
That's pretty much all you saw. And you actually saw, I don't know if you remember this, on the bench when the New York Jets were playing, I believe it was New England. It was pretty early in Sam Darnold's career. He was on the bench and some coach came up and said something to him. And he said, "I saw ghosts," or "I see ghosts."
Yeah.
Well, I think Geno Smith had his own little "I see ghost" meme when, the sidelines Mike caught him saying, "Oh my God," when he sees Aaron Donald rushing at him. So very disappointed from what I saw from Seattle. Your thoughts on the game, Coach?
Yeah, you kind of touched on Seattle a little bit, and obviously tough game for Geno Smith. We don't even have to get in the numbers; they're not good. I think what was surprising is going this week, I was one of them. I felt like this was a great week for Tyler Higbee with Cooper Kupp out to be very, very relevant and finish as a top 5 tight end this week. I thought Van Jefferson was going to slide into that wide receiver 1 role and lead that team in targets, but it was Tutu Atwell and it was Puka Nacua, who combined had 16 grabs for over 238 yards. They didn't get in the end zone. Matt Stafford looked like the guy post elbow injury of last season, 24-38 for 334 yards against what's supposed to be a pretty decent Seattle Seahawks defense. So very impressed with Sean McVay. A lot of people, to your point, I know we talked about this a little bit, thought they might be in tank mode, but the Rams showed up. Let's see if that travels next week. You got a much tougher matchup against San Francisco, but I think you're going to see the Rams are going to have to throw around a little bit to be relevant in that game too. But very, very impressed with the Los Angeles Rams, especially on the road against a 12th man in Seattle. Very impressive win for them.
Most certainly that. And we get to find out if there's any real push for the Rams this year with what they got to face this week, because we're not going to touch upon what San Francisco did this week in our game highlights, but they certainly had an impressive win in Pittsburgh. Moving on to probably the best offensive game. This was the game where you had to be happy if you were a fantasy manager, and that's Miami Dolphins 36, Los Angeles Chargers 34. That still sounds weird, Los Angeles Chargers. I'm an LA guy forever, so that doesn't seem to fit. But regardless, what also doesn't seem to fit is that the Stanley defense. We kind of expected them at some point to be able to step up in big games. And that whole team as a whole never seems to do when they play tough teams. And so here today, you got nothing but offense from Miami. And, Tyreek Hill, with what he was able to do out there, I mean, that guy is literally unguardable. 200 yards receiving, 215, 11 catches, 2 touchdowns. He's literally unguardable. Your thoughts on the game, Coach?
Yeah, I mean, you said it. I mean, I think the greatest thing, the best takeaway from here is a couple things. One, I was very excited to see what Kellen Moore was going to do with the Chargers. I think Justin Herbert's going to have a monster year. I know he struggled a little bit in this game, only throwing for 229 yards and 1 touchdown, but I expect a very big season there in a Kellen Moore-led offense. But I think what was extremely impressive was Tua Tagovailoa coming off the concussions he had last year. He goes 28 of 45, 466 yards, throws 3 touchdowns. And there was a comment made about his arm strength, and he kind of talked about that after in the post-game conference, where someone made a comment about his inability to, throw the deep ball and throw the ball on a rope, and we'd call it one ball. And his comment back was 466 yards. And that's all he said. Right. So that was a great comeback. And, Tyreek Hill, 11 for 215, new touchdown. Jalen Waddle. I'm excited about Durham Smythe and as a tight end in that offense. He saw, I think it was 7 or 8 targets. So Miami's going to be a tough out the rest of the year. And, as far as the Chargers go, it's like, man, they just don't seem to be able to get over the hump. Very, very talented roster. They're like the Dallas Cowboys of the AFC. They can have a great regular season and then, they find a way to bow out in the first round of the playoffs or in the last game of the season to keep them out of the playoffs. But there's a lot of football left. A high-scoring game. I think it was a fun game to watch, but looking forward to seeing what those two offenses do next week.
Hey, one more note before we move on to the next game, and I was really impressed with Josh Kelly. And I know everyone, if you were on Twitter this week, obviously a lot of people were talking about Fab, how much we should spend and what guys should we spend it on. He is getting opportunities. I mean, he had double digits. And so that's neat to see. And it's pretty exciting if you've got him on your bench, because he's going to be somebody, especially at the running back spot. It's tough to play 17 NFL games in a season as a running back. So at some point, that guy that a lot of people kind of made fun of in the past, he's going to have an integral part in this offense with Austin Eckler in it, or if he ever were to get hurt, especially with him not in it. But let's move on to another game. That's Green Bay Packers 38, Chicago Bears 20. I think if you've watched the show over the last few weeks, you guys know how much I love Green Bay's offense. You guys know how much I've been excited about Jordan Love. So this is exactly what I expected. He was very efficient. He had 3 touchdowns. He made big plays when they needed him to. He had a 4th down touchdown pass to Aaron Jones. He had a big 3rd down completion to Jalen Reed. If he was able to keep his feet a little bit better on one time where he's pressured, he would have been able to throw the ball much better to Luke Musgrave. Would have been an easy walk-in touchdown. So, as a guy that was high on this offense, I'm pretty excited about what I saw.
Yeah, look, LaFleur is a very good play caller, and they're going to put him in situations. They're going to help protect Jordan Love, and I think as the offense grows and the season goes on, you're going to see him open up that playbook even a little bit more when they get Christian Watson back. I think like we saw to Jaden Reed and Romeo Doubs, who got in the end zone a couple times. And obviously Aaron Jones, 11 touches for 127 yards, got in the end zone, both as a runner and as a pass catcher. So very impressive there. Week 1's one of those weeks, right? There's always 3 or 4 games that there's upsets. I'm the idiot that took the Bears last week, and felt like, hey, this is one of those games where, I just felt like Chicago's playing at home. A lot of hype around Justin Fields. You bring in DJ Moore. You got the 3-headed monster in the backfield in the running game. And I just felt like there's going to be one of those games where Chicago's going to, get the upset. I was way off on that one. Got a lot of other games right, but was definitely off on that one. But very, very good opening game from Jordan Love. And it's just the Packers just, again, at the quarterback position, looks like they've just reloaded. And they may have their guy for the next 10 to 12 years. Great story of Jordan Love coming out of Utah State, finally getting an opportunity to be the guy.
I only want to ask one thing. If you're a Justin Fields manager, meaning you have him on your team, when do you when do you start to be really worried? Because again, it looked like if they're in the lead and they're able to allow him to just run, and if they got to come back with the passing game, It didn't look good. And I don't know if, again, we all wanted Adam Gase out of there because he was awful and this and that. But if you looked at what they did offensively, it wasn't pretty.
It wasn't, and it's almost like it took you back. I'm not going to say it's probably not a great comparison, but just from a mindset of watching the game, it almost felt like a Matt Nagy when Justin Fields first got there. It just seemed like the offense was a little bit dysfunctional. If it's me, I'm taking Khalil
Did I
Herbert.
say Adam Gase? I said Adam
What's
Gase,
that?
didn't I?
Yeah, that's right.
I said Adam Gase. Yeah, okay. Go ahead.
That's
Sorry.
right. When you take those three running backs that they have in that offense, I'm going to try to do everything I can to establish the run early and often, open up the RPO, open up the play action, use Cole Kmet and use DJ Moore a little bit more effectively and trying to get them into space. But it just seemed like they could never really get in a rhythm. And look, Justin Fields did not look great, but I believe in the talent of Justin Fields. He comes from an Ohio State offense with Ryan Day. That's a pro-style offense. He can make all the throws, but he just take a deep breath, relax, let the game come to you, make the plays when they're there. Don't try to do anything outside of the box in the passing game. And look, if the pocket breaks down, take off, go, get a first down. Let's live another series. But hopefully, we'll see Chicago take that next step offensively. Because yeah, that was not a fun game to watch if you're a Chicago Bears fan.
I liked it, and just as a fantasy manager and as a Jordan Love fan. All right, let's move on. New York Jets 22, Buffalo Bills 16. First thing, I mean, we've already talked enough about the unfortunate incident with Aaron Rodgers and the Achilles. So let's move on to the good stuff. And the good stuff is Breece Hall looked pretty damn good. I mean, his first carry of the game, I believe he went off for 20 yards. Yeah. The next carry after that went for 83. I think that they can start to unleash him more, and he's such an integral part of fantasy football, and more importantly, of their offense. It was nice to see him come back the way they did, and what they did on the defensive side of the ball with Jordan Whitehead having 3 interceptions, and I think that was the story of the game if we really talk about it. And I read something today talking about the struggles. Well, talking about the struggles of Josh Allen since Brian Daboll has left, and it's real. The guy had 3 interceptions, lost a fumble. It's just unfortunate. We hope that he's a big part. The first thing I saw the first thing I thought of while watching the game is that his trajectory is going to be very kind of I don't want it to be, but I feel like very Phillip Rivers-ish, as far as a very talented quarterback that just can't ever get over the hump.
And hey, look, you have Stephon Diggs, you have Dawson Knox. Now you went out and got Dalton Kincaid to play the big slot. You've got guys that can play, and there's no excuses. And you're right. People don't understand how big of an influence an offensive coordinator or quarterbacks coach or these coaches make on these players' careers. When Josh Allen came out of Wyoming, there was a lot of question marks about his accuracy. We all knew he had the big arm. We all know he had the wiggle. We all know he had the ability to run over linebackers if he needed to, which you saw him do in the game where he took on some hits he probably shouldn't have. But yeah, it makes a difference. I mean, I know Sean McDermott's a defensive guy and wants to be able to establish the run and do these things. It probably goes a little bit against his nature, but when you got a guy like Josh Allen, we just got to play smart. And maybe to me, let's work the underneath stuff first. So take what the defense gives us. Let's get Josh Allen in a rhythm. Let's get him some easy throws early in the game, and then we can kind of open that up a little bit as the game goes on. But
I mean,
I got to make those adjustments.
I don't necessarily think this is a coaching problem with Josh Allen. Now, granted, it might be as far as Brian no longer being there, but I mean, he's just got to be a better decision maker when he's just chucking the ball down the field. When he threw the pick and they caught it at the 3-yard line, granted, that was almost like a great punt. But to do that late in the game twice in other situations, he's got to be smarter with the ball. So hopefully he'll turn it around, because he obviously, I mean, heck, in a lot of rankings, he's the number 2 quarterback in NFL.
Yeah, I took a couple different drafts, and Anthony Tippett, who's on here right now, so I'm going to give him a little shout out. Good buddy of mine. He's the one that I'm in that league with. Tip Dog, I think, is his nickname he goes by in that deal, but on Sleeper. But you got to be smart, right? And that's one of the things that Anthony and I talked about when we're at the draft is you got to be smart in how you utilize players, how you utilize people in a system, and play smart football. And I think that's where you're going to have to see where that goes, and just be smart. I mean, I think that's the crazy part about it, right? I think sometimes we overcomplicate things. So simple is better, right?
Simple is definitely better, especially when you're facing a Zach Wilson team. I mean, just make smart decisions and allow yourself not to be the reason why you lost. All right, let's move on to the Thursday night football. It's so great. It seems like we just got done watching an incredible game that ended on a punt return, and now we're moving on to a game tomorrow, and that's Minnesota 0-1 at Philadelphia 1-0. Just like we do every Sunday, we do this with every game. We break down who we think who's gonna win against the spread, and then we also talk about our start and sit options, who we would play depending on roster size and so forth. So with me for the pick, I like Philadelphia 35, Minnesota 17. Wasn't exactly Minnesota didn't show me much last week in the loss to Tampa Bay and Philadelphia. Anytime you play a New England defense, I think a lot of people were disappointed what they saw from Philadelphia, but I think that's a situation where they're playing not a great team, but a great defensive-minded coach on the road in week one. So I'm not going to put a lot of stock in that. I like Philadelphia 35, Minnesota 17. How about you, Coach?
Yeah, so we're very close. I've got a 34-23. I know Philly lost to Kobe Dean this week, the linebacker. He's going to be out for a little bit. I was not impressed what I saw from the Philadelphia Eagles defense. I think is a little bit more concerning. I think defensively, New England, Bill Belichick always has a great game plan, so that doesn't really necessarily surprise me in terms of how they played against Philly last week. But the Philly defense was the part. Mac Jones picked them apart. Mac Jones had a chance 25-20 late in the game to try to take him down and get a touchdown to win the game. So there's a little bit of concerns there with the Philadelphia defense, but I think they're going to get it figured out. There's way too much talent, especially across that defensive line and in the trenches. And now James Bradbury is out, so that's a big hit to Philly as well at the corner position. You've got Kenny Gainwell out, but I still think Philadelphia wins this game. I just don't buy into Minnesota's defense at all. They can't stop a nosebleed, So I just think that the Phillies got too much talent on the offensive side of the ball.
They do, but it's going to be nice to actually see them. Let's also talk about the fact that who's not very good in primetime games? Kirk Cousins. Yeah. I mean, everybody's going, can we just tell Kirk it's a Sunday at 1:00 in the afternoon and everything will be fine. So let's jump into the start and sit part. For Minnesota, who do you like? Who are you starting? Who do you feel comfortable starting?
I think it's Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson. I think it's a game you're going to have to. I'm not starting Kirk Cousins if I don't have to. And again, depends on the format you're in, depends on your roster. It's, the start and sit questions are all relative to scoring systems and all these other variables. But I don't think this is a game that Kirk Cousins goes off against Philly. Matter of fact, there's a line, I can't remember what it was. I think it was like 83.3 yards. I would not be surprised to see Justin Jefferson have the under in terms of receiving yards. Because I think they're going to try to, take him out of the game as much as they can. I think they're going to but he's Justin Jefferson. You get 7 grabs for 83 yards. You find your way in the end zone. You're still a guy that you're going to play. And then TJ Hawkinson, I think, is a guy that's going to be able to have some open space. I think the focus of the coverage is going to be on TJ. Justin. I think there's going to be some room. TJ Hawkinson and Jordan Addison. But my must starts would be Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson. Kirk Cousins is a guy that I'm going to sit. We'll get to that. And then, of course, Jordan Addison is a guy that I don't have as a start or a sit, depending on your roster. If you feel like he's a guy you need to play and you've got multiple flex positions, and that's a call that you got to make. But the only 2 guys I'm comfortable as a starter is Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson. What about you for Minnesota?
I kind of agree with you, but it's very similar to what you just said at the end when you said depending on your roster, because there's a lot of teams where I got to throw Jordan Addison in the lineup, or I got to throw a Kirk Cousins. But again, I don't care who you're facing, how good they may be on the defensive side. You're playing Justin Jefferson every week. And then TJ Hawkinson, talk about landscape where you're playing anybody who's healthy. That's the tight end landscape. So TJ Hawkinson is the top 5 tight end. You're playing them every week. Let's move on to the other side of the ball with Philadelphia. Who we playing? In fact, we have a big question mark right off the bat because one of the players that we didn't really talk too much about, but they don't have they don't have Gainwell this week. Do you feel comfortable starting Swift? I know for me and a lot of teams and the way the running back position is, I am. I mean, they got to pick somebody. They had Penny last week as a healthy scratch. At least Swift was on the field. They got to play somebody at running back. So I'm playing Swift in a lot of leagues. But what about you, Coach? What are you doing for Philadelphia's offense?
Yeah, so I've got Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith. I think those are the obvious ones. You got them on your lineup. Don't need to spend a whole lot of time on that. There's not anybody. You're not starting anybody over those guys because you draft those guys in the places that you did for a reason. I do think DeAndre Swift takes the lead role this week. I do have how little he was used last week. 1 carry for 3 yards. Only had 2 targets, 1 reception, and no yards. So I'm a little bit concerned with his usage last week. But again, they felt like it was. I think it was raining that week. They felt like Kenny Gainwell was kind of the senior leader of that offense. It was an opportunity for him to get, hey, it's game 1. This guy's worked extremely hard. He was pivotal for us down the stretch last year and in the playoffs. He's our guy in week 1. We'll ease DeAndre Swift into it. Well, now DeAndre Swift's got to be your guy. But again, Minnesota's defense, I'm not a fan at all. I would not be surprised to see DeAndre Swift have a big role in this game, but I'd be a little bit hesitant because Rashad Penny is a guy when he's healthy plays very, very well. And we saw it last year when he was with Seattle when he was healthy in the games that he played.
He was healthy last week, Coach.
He was a healthy scratch. But again, you can only carry 3. You're only going to carry typically on your roster 3 running backs. It felt like with the matchup, Boston Scott was a better player. I'm not saying Rashad Penny's the guy I'm going to play. He's the guy I'm going to sit. But I'm concerned about the touches he could take away from DeAndre Swift.
Gotcha.
And Boston Scott could take some touches away in the passing game. But, yeah, I have DeAndre Swift, I'm playing him. So he's the guy that I'm playing as well.
Agreed. Let's talk about sits then, Coach. Let's talk about sits for Minnesota. Who are you not playing?
So Kirk Cousins touched on that. I think Philadelphia is going to put some pressure on him, and it's primetime game. I'm going to go with the numbers, and I'm going to sit Kirk Cousins. And I'm going to sit Alexander Madison. Last week, 11 carries, 34 yards, 3 grabs for 10 versus Tampa Bay last week. This defense in Philly is a much different beast. So I don't see Alexander Madison. I'm voting the under on his rushing yards if I'm playing player props. And then KJ Osborne, 6 targets, 3 grabs, 31 yards. Again, it's Justin Jefferson, T.J. Hawkinson. I'm not starting anybody else from Minnesota, but I'm definitely sitting Kirk Cousins, Alexander Madison, and KJ Osborne in this matchup.
Are you sitting anyone for Philadelphia? We've already said that if you have Swift, you're probably starting him more based off of need and possible opportunity that he should get. Everyone else, you're running full bore with him, correct? What about Geidert? Sorry, I'm saying his name. I feel like I'm saying his
Goddard.
name. Yes. What are your thoughts on him? Because he put up a goose egg last week.
Yeah, almost absent last week. I gotta believe they're going to get him involved early. Whether that's a tight end screen, it's a speed out, it's a snag route or a curl route over the middle. I think you're going to get him involved early, but I don't know that I see. Look, the reality is he's a top 7 tight end. So if you've got Dallas Goedert, you're starting him. You're playing him. So I missed him. I had him in parentheses on here and just skipped down to the sits and forgot to mention him. But yeah, if you've got Dallas Goedert, you're playing him. In tight end premium, he's going to have a bounce back game. I'm not looking. I think he could see 7-8 targets in this game. He's going to get 4 or 5 grabs, and I think there's a good chance he finds the end zone this week.
Let's move on to our next little topic here, Coach, and that's risers and fallers. And one of my risers is one of the guys that we mentioned in the injury portion. That was Kenneth Gainwell. We just talked about him. The fact that he was able to garner, a lot of people thought he was strictly going to be a third down back coming out of Memphis. He was, a little small, so people were worried about his size and so forth. But all preseason, everybody with the Minnesota, I'm blanking here. Help me out here. With everyone talking about Philadelphia is that he was the number 1 back all year, preseason. And a lot of people are like, whatever, he's just the returner. It's going to be Swift. It's going to be Penny. And then he actually came out and he was actually the number 1 back. So you got to like that if you got him, because more times than not, if you got Gainwell, it didn't cost you much. So he was a riser, and that kind of changed a little bit because now we have him with an injury. So I'm going to replace him with Luke Musgrave.
Yeah.
For me, the reason why he's a riser is the offenses he's in. They're very young at the skill positions. He was able to garner 3 catches for 50 yards in his week 1. You should have had a touchdown if the play was run, a little more smoothly, but you had a quarterback who's kind of bobbling backwards. He started running backwards because he was so wide open, and he kind of fell down after catching it. But really liked what I saw in Luke Musgrave, and I think his output is only going to increase from here on out. The other guy that I picked was Zay Flowers.
Yeah.
Went into this game hoping, and I say only hoping because I have so much invested in Rashad Bateman. You heard a lot of great things about Rashad Bateman last week from Coach Harbaugh, talking about he's excited about what he's going to see, but he wasn't so excited that they really kind of gave him as many opportunities as I would have liked him to see. And what I did see was that Zay Flowers is the clear number 1 receiver for Baltimore until Mark Andrews. We're talking about receivers, so he's the number 1 receiver. But Zay Flowers went out. He had 9 receptions for 78 yards. You would like to see him have a little better ADOT, but the reality is that they're trying to find ways to get who they think is their number 1 playmaker the ball as quickly as often as possible, and he certainly delivered. So I love Zay Flowers. I love Kenneth Gainwell after he returns from injury, and I love Luke Musgrave. What about you, Coach? Who are 2 guys that you're excited about after seeing week 1?
Well, we touched on one of them, which is Jordan Love, who I know you're very, very big on. We talked about his numbers. He led him to a win on the road against Chicago, division opponent. And I guess Jordan Love can say he owns Chicago, just like Aaron Rodgers says. But I love, again, LaFleur, I love his play calling. I love what they're doing with Aaron Jones. I like what they're doing with Luke Musgrave. I'm big on Luke Musgrave before the season started. So I think that I agree with you there on Zay Flowers and Kenneth Gainwell. But I love Jordan Love, and I love Puka Nacua. And look, when we talk about Puka Nacua, you're talking about a guy that's a riser because, first off, look where he went in the NFL draft, right? He doesn't have a great athletic profile. 4'6", 240, just like Cooper Kupp. The difference is Cooper Kupp was in the 90th percentile in agility, and Nacua was in like the 10th percentile. So he's not a great athlete, but he's a guy that he's smart. He understands how to find space within the defense. He understands when to settle. He understands when to, the timing of and the rhythm of the route concepts that he puts in. So, and I think he's going to, until Cooper Kupp gets back, he's a guy that's going to get you 7 to 10 targets consistently week in and week out. And it's going to come down to what does he do with it once he catches the ball? Can he give you some yards after the catch, and can he find the end zone? So I'm taking him for the next 3 or 4 weeks as long as Cooper Kupp is out. And it's going to be interesting to see 2 players that he played the Cooper Kupp role this week. And so when Cooper Kupp comes back, obviously he takes over that role, but you're going to find ways to get Puka Nacua involved because it's a lot better than the other options that you got, So big kudos to him. I bought him where I could. As long as I wasn't overpaying. There is one league I did probably overpay for him, but I did it because I wanted that for the next 3 weeks. There's player props every week in that league, and I won it this last week, $100 for having the highest scoring team. This week it's the highest scoring player, and yes, it's a San Francisco defense, but it's all about targets, it's all about volume. And when you're trying to forecast players, give me the guy that's going to get the volume, and then let's figure out what he does with that volume. And Puka Nacua is a guy that you see 10 targets again, 8 to 10 targets this week against San Francisco.
I just saw on my phone that I got him in my home league. Now, we talk about home leagues, and they do things differently. We're used to fab on most of our sleeper leagues. We're also used to, maybe they have order in which you are as far as you're ranked in the league and so forth. But we do it a little bit differently. How we do free agents in our league is that we have to pay cold, hard cash for the guy. So it doesn't cost us any fab money, doesn't cost us any draft picks, and certainly doesn't cost us having to trade anybody to acquire them. So I just got Puka, and I might have overpaid. I paid $33 real to get him on my team. But in Dynasty, I feel like if he can go out there and do that in game 1, that's a risk I'm willing to take, especially, again, if it costs me no money in the fab and it costs me no draft pick and it doesn't cost me have to acquire him through a trade. So easy money for me. I'm glad that I got him on my team. Let's talk about our fallers, and we'll go with your first 2 before we get into mine. So who are 2 guys that after you saw them this week that you're kind of a little bit lower on than you were prior?
Well, if we were talking about coaches from a fantasy perspective, there's nobody that could fall less than Arthur Smith because you can't fall any lower than he already is, right? So here we are. You have Kyle Pitts. He drafted 4th overall, has 1,000 yards receiving his rookie year. Last year was an absolute joke with Marcus Mariota and the play calling there. And from a fantasy perspective, if you're an Atlanta Falcons fan, you probably love him because he runs the ball. You keep yourself in games. And so I get it. In the NFL, it's about winning games. From a fantasy perspective, Drake London, 1 target, no grabs. Desmond Ritter's 15 of 18, 115 yards with a touchdown, which was Bijan Robinson. If you saw the play, Bijan Robinson should have been tackled 3 yards in that pass and was able to break a tackle, break another tackle, and get in the end zone. Pitts only 2 catches, 44 yards. I'm concerned about Drake London because I'm concerned about the passing volume. I'm concerned again about the quarterback play. I'm concerned about the play caller in that offense, that you've got 2 guys you took with heavy draft capital, 3 if you count Bijan Robinson, Drake London, and Kyle Pitts. And I just don't trust the play caller, which is why Tyler Algier and Bijan Robinson are the 2 guys you want to have in that offense. It's not Drake London. It's not Kyle Pitts right now, unfortunately, until proven otherwise. And I would love it if somehow the Cowboys could go get Kyle Pitts from Atlanta and put him in an offense that he can actually see targets and on target targets, right? Targets is one thing, but if the quarterback's not throwing you a catchable ball, that's a whole nother deal. But Drake London for me is a big one. And the other one's Antonio Gibson. He's supposed to be the passing get back in an Eric Bieniemy offense. He gets 3 carries for 9 yards, only 1 target, and he catches that for 10 yards. Brian Robinson got 19 touches for 59 yards in the run game and had 2 targets. So out-targeted Antonio Gibson and also had a receiving touchdown. So I was I won't say very hopeful coming the year because I never thought Antonio Gibson was an elite back by any means, but I felt like what he did at Memphis and what he's done as an ex-receiver, he would at least be a fantasy relevant in PPR formats, and we're just not seeing it. And I'm a little surprised at week 1. But again, it is only week 1, but the fact he was out-touched as much as he was by Bijan Robinson and saw more targets, I think it's very concerning if you're Brian Robinson. Yeah. I think you're very concerned if you're an Antonio Gibson owner in fantasy football right now.
It's so weird because I won't mention the analyst's name, but he taught me something a few years ago, essentially that if you see the same thing year after year, you kind of got to believe that's just who the player is. Yeah. And so guys like Antonio Gibson, guys like even Rashad Bateman, kind of shrug his shoulders and say, shit, I missed on Antonio Gibson or I missed on Rashad Bateman. So I'm beginning, after hearing that guy talk, I'm beginning to kind of take that on. In fact, we talked about free agency as far as it relates to fab or spending real money. When I just got Puka, I cut Rashad Bateman. A lot of people might go, wow, that's a lot to invest in a guy in Puka. But I've already in 1 week have seen more from Puka than I ever saw Rashad Bateman do. Now, Rashad Bateman had 1 game where he had like a 60-yard touchdown reception and showed us this and that. But I worry about Bateman. I could actually put him in my fallers. I worry about Bateman because there's now more mouths to feed in that offense. He's no longer somebody you're going to depend on when you look at a Zay Flowers and you look at a Mark Andrews. There's just more mouths to feed, and he hasn't shown me, or he apparently hasn't showed Baltimore enough to get his mouth fed. Another guy that I have as a faller is Cam Akers, and this breaks my heart. And Alex Johnson's on here; he's talking, and I would love to have. I agree that some of the money that we saw people spend on Puka is incredibly way too much. But I would love to know what Alex's opinion on him as far as dynasty and the years forward. I can't wait till we actually get him on the show so we can ask him questions.
It's coming.
Like that. But he is a guy who I feel, and I believe in prior shows that I've seen from him, he's always been kind of high on Cam Akers. And what worried me more than first, if you look at his numbers, 22 carries, you love that. If you're a Cam Akers manager, oh my God, that's all you want from a guy is that type of opportunity. For him to only get 29 yards out of that opportunity, and knowing that most of his work came very late in the game, because Kyron, he kind of led the way from the start. It's concerning and it's worrisome because the way he finished 2022, those last 6 games, I was very excited about what I saw coming into the year. You didn't hear a lot of rumors or talk or tea leaves. There weren't a lot of tea leaves coming out about either of the running backs throughout the preseason. So I had no indication that Mr. Williams was going to be true number 1 back. But going forward, fortunately, the leagues that I have Cam Akers, I don't have to start him. I'm not going to play him until I see more out of what's really going to come from the offense. And the other guy that I'm worried about is Najee Harris.
Yeah.
And I'm worried about Najee Harris, not because he played San Francisco, but you mentioned it earlier when you talked about just touches and opportunities. Najee Harris had 6 carries. Jaylen Warren had 6 carries. Najee Harris had 2 targets. Jaylen Warren had 6 targets. So that's worrisome. That tells me that they're looking for a little more pop. And again, I'm not faulting any output either one of them have, because neither one of them did well. But the fact that Jaylen Warren has already matched him and surpassed him or passed him with the receptions or targets, that's worrisome. So those are my followers for the week, Coach.
Hey, those are 2 great ones, and I agree with you 100%. I think that Jaylen Warren is a guy that there was a lot of talk about him in the offseason and what he could do, not just from a running standpoint, but also what he could do in the passing game. We saw that with the target utilization this first week, and I'm big on Jaylen Warren, I think, rest of season, and I think that does not bode well for Najee Harris. He's a ground and pound type of guy. He doesn't have the most efficient, but he gets the volume. And so with fantasy, sometimes it's all about volume, right? Najee Harris was that guy his first 2 years in the league, and now all of a sudden he's starting to split some volume with Jaylen Warren. I kind of touched on that earlier, making the comparison with later in the year for Zeke Elliott and Tony Pollard. That's kind of how I see this backfield. I think you're going to see Jaylen Warren earn more and more snap share and be more and more relevant, more explosive, and gives that offense something different that Najee Harris can't give them. So I think those are 2 great picks, man. I agree with you on both. And it's frustrating for Cam Akers. He had the injuries. He had the situation where he asked for the trade, mid-season. He was able to work that out with Sean McVay and actually looked pretty good down the stretch last year a couple times. But, look, the writing's on the wall. And it's like that saying, right? When people show you who they are, believe them, right? And I think Cam Akers is showing us that, he's just not going to be that guy. He's going to have to rely on an injury, unfortunately, to somebody to Williams in that backfield to get back to fantasy relevance. I don't see it moving forward either. I think those are a great call.
And we're not going to see much from him this week against San Francisco, so we're still not going to have the answers to our questions. Coach, always enjoy the show. Can't wait to watch Philadelphia and see what we kind of expected to see. Hope to see Justin Jefferson do what he does, and can't wait to jump on this Sunday morning. Again, start almost said shit. Start shit show Sunday morning. We also have our picks against the spread. I know for me, I was 9-6, so not too disappointed with that. Hopefully we can do better Sunday, and we'll go over both of our picks and what we did week 1 and move on forward to week 2. Appreciate you, Coach. Hope you have a great rest of your week and beautiful SoCal.
You too, brother. We'll talk to you soon, man.
All right. See you guys Sunday.